35 years ago, Kevin Costner's masterpiece quietly changed Western cinema forever. Anyone who knows Western cinema knows the history of the popular cinema genre and its evolution over the last 100 or so years. What's most fascinating about the genre is how it has affected audiences and audience appeal throughout the different eras of cinema. It seems there are multiple watershed films that either flip the script on the entire genre, pushing it in a different direction, or stand on their own as staples of the genre at any given time. From the classical era that influenced all westerns to the stylized Italian spaghetti westerns and the contemporary revisionist westerns, the genre has a plethora of important films to experience. Although they are not made as often in modern cinema, westerns remain an important cultural cornerstone of cinematic storytelling. Occasionally, a western will come along that cements its place among the best in the genre because the film knows exactly how to expand on the genre and honor what came before. After the new Hollywood era of filmmaking, westerns became much less common, and when they were made, it was rare to get one as good as the classics from the previous 5 decades. The 80s was perhaps the worst decade for the genre as westerns became repetitive and watered down with very little to offer fans and audiences. Then, in 1990, the genre found a new resurgence that spawned a ton of revisionist westerns that are still made to this day. While fans know what an achievement Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves was from a critical and commercial standpoint, it's also worth talking about how it changed the western genre overall. Dances with Wolves kickstarted the 90s after an underwhelming 80s decade. Throughout the history of Western cinema, there have been multiple watershed films and filmmakers that ushered in refreshing eras for the genre. After classical westerns ran their course with audiences, directors like Sergio Leone and Sergio Corbucci were taking the genre in a new direction in their respective homelands. Italy's spaghetti westerns were doing things that the classical American westerns weren't allowed to do. With their hyper-stylized, violent, and grounded approach to the genre, Leone and Corbucci, among others, inspired American directors to take a similar approach. Once the Hays Code was dissolved, filmmakers had a lot more freedom in America and were able to start applying more realism to their films. Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch in 1969 became the earliest example of American revisionist westerns that would populate the 1970s. However, once the 70s concluded, westerns, along with other genres, became watered down by rip-offs and reimaginings of every popular film in existence. While classics were still spawned from the 80s, they were far and few in between in comparison to the 70s. Notable westerns from each decade release year: Stagecoach, 1939. Red River, 1948. The Searchers, 1956. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. Two Mules for Sister Sarah, 1970. Pale Rider, 1985. Unforgiven, 1992. 3:10 to Yuma, 2007. True Grit, 2010. The Harder They Fall, 2021. This was especially a bad decade for westerns, which really turned its attention to western parodies and satire, especially when a lot of the more dramatic westerns failed to captivate audiences. Outside of Clint Eastwood, there weren't a lot of directors still making good westerns. When actor-turned-director Kevin Costner wanted to start making westerns, it immediately became tantalizing for fans of the genre. Costner's revisionist western went beyond the anti-westerns of the 70s to bring audiences one of the most thought-provoking historical dramas of all time. Dances with Wolves was obviously a critical and commercial success, as it has since grossed a worldwide box office of $424 million and won multiple Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The film came at an opportune time for the genre and inspired the next wave of westerns in the 90s, including some of the genre's best, like Unforgiven, The Quick and the Dead and Legends of the Fall, among others. Costner also solidified his status as a Western director and went on to make other classics, such as The Postman and Open Range. Dances with Wolves gives an accurate portrayal of the American frontier. While Kevin Costner's concept of an American soldier slowly ingratiating himself into the lifestyle and culture of a Native American tribe wasn't necessarily a new idea in 1990, nobody told that kind of story the way Dances with Wolves did. Coming out of a decade where westerns were lacking an innovative direction, Dances with Wolves effectively balanced the Western with drama and deliberate social commentary. While the film turns into an homage to classic Westerns and Western tropes at various times, Dances with Wolves exists consistently as a dramatic historical telling of the American frontier. Costner's film builds on themes and ideas presented in classic 70s revisionist Westerns like Ulzana's Raid and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, but adds an extra twist to those conventions. The beauty of Dances with Wolves is that Costner initially frames the story as a romanticism of the American frontier that turns an average Civil War soldier into a man of the land. In this way, Dances with Wolves plays on the moral ambiguities of the West by making the audience believe there are none for most of the film. Dances with Wolves cast character. Kevin Costner, Lieutenant John J. Dunbar. Mary McDonnell stands with a fist. Graham Greene kicking bird. Rodney A. Grant wind in his hair. Floyd Red Crow. Westerman 10 Bears. Tantu Cardinal Blackshaw. Robert Pastorelli Timmons. By the time the third act of Dances with Wolves rolls around, Costner reminds audiences of the brutal truth of the American frontier after making them fall in love with it as much as Dunbar does. With a storyline that consistently builds an experience of the American frontier and its beauty, Costner knows he has to bring the story back down to reality and press on every truth and tragedy behind Native American oppression in America's history. When there is none of John Dunbar left and there is only Dances with Wolves, that is when the protagonist endures what every Sioux has endured for generations. Losing almost everything he has come to hold most dear, Dunbar is forced to make a difficult decision that brilliantly ends the film. Aside from its genre conventions and the watershed script by Michael Blake, Dances with Wolves is only further heightened by various cinematic aspects of its production. Between Costner's direction and performance, the captivating supporting roles, Dean Semler's visual scope and John Barry's moving score, Dances with Wolves was a new kind of pure drama set in the American West. It is no surprise that it was one of the best films of the year. 1990s Westerns continued to follow the format laid out for them. The argument could be made that if Dances with Wolves didn't usher in the next wave of Western cinema, Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven was going to do it either way. In fact, Eastwood almost made Unforgiven years earlier, but intentionally waited for himself to age enough to match the role he would be playing. Eastwood has always carried the Western genre and would have continued to do so. Nonetheless, Dances with Wolves did come out first, but both masterpieces ignited a new wave of Westerns in the 1990s and early 2000s. Looking at Unforgiven as an example, Eastwood crafted a perfect love letter to the genre and his own career while putting a revisionist spin on the characters he usually plays in Westerns. It is as much a neo-revisionist Western as Dances with Wolves is. Unforgiven is one example of a 90s Western having a big effect on the genre after the release of Dances with Wolves and continuing to follow suit after the 1990 masterpiece. Many Westerns after 1990 would go on to follow the format that was laid out to start the decade, and it would bring the genre back into the fold as one of the most important in cinema. While there was a consistent trend of fewer Westerns being made that has continued to this day, there is also an unexpected gem that comes out when audiences least expect it. There has also been a brilliant trend of putting a contemporary spin on classical Westerns by remaking them. Whether it is James Mangold's 3:10 to Yuma or the Coen brothers' True Grit, there have been remakes that are as influential or iconic as the original. Then, of course, there is no denying how impactful Quentin Tarantino has been by bringing back spaghetti Westerns for a time. While it is hard to say for sure that contemporary Westerns would not exist in the same way without Dances with Wolves, there is no denying the impact of the film. It did, at the very least, reignite the genre in the 90s and, by extension, quietly changed the direction of Western cinema from that point on.